Missile away.
Once upon a time, there was a boy.
I loved animated movies from an early age, and I sort of dreamed of making my own comic books or animated movies when I'd grow up.
Who wanted to tell stories a whole new way.
Jordan was a master in game design.
He rotoscoped his brother's movements.
And created A Tale of a Prince.
Jordan managed to create such deep emotions
that ushered in a new age of gaming.
Prince of Persia is also kind of considered one of the first action-adventure games. Sands of Time, unfortunately, it didn't really translate into the blockbuster sales that was expected.
This is the story of the Prince of Persia series. At a young age, Jordan Mechner discovers what will become his lifetime passion.
I loved animated movies from an early age, and I sort of dreamed of making my own comic books or animated movies when I'd grow up.
In 1979, a new computer from Apple gives him a chance to make his dreams a reality.
When I was in high school, the Apple II computer was invented, and to me that was just the coolest way of telling a story on screen, that I could actually do at home without any special skills. It was beyond my means to do an animated movie or a live-action movie that would be any good. But I could do a computer game that would be pretty good. Within that, create a story in a world that the people who played the game could then experience and enjoy.
His interest in creating games and storytelling carries over into college.
I went to Yale in New Haven, Connecticut, and I ended up majoring in psychology. But mostly what I did during my 4 years of college was go to the movies and program computer games, which really cut into studying and so forth.
It's not long before Mechner's talents are discovered by a publisher called Broderbund.
Broderbund was probably the biggest software company of that time. And they were publishing all kinds of games. So if you're a game maker at that time, being hooked up with Broderbund was a pretty significant deal.
While still a college student, Mechner goes to work on his first game for Broderbund.
My first game, Karateka, one of the things that inspired it were the film studies classes that I was taking at the same time. It seemed to me that games were kind of at a stage where silent films had been at the turn of the century. For that reason, Karateka was structured very much like a silent movie. And there were a lot of technical limitations that games had at that time, which silent movies also had. Characters couldn't talk, you couldn't really move the camera.
Karateka comes out for the Apple II in 1984. It sells 500,000 copies.
During my senior year, Karateka was published and did very well. So when I graduated, instead of getting a regular job, as most of my friends did, I thought, well, I'll just do another computer game.
Mechner graduates in 1985. 1 year later, he begins work on a new project. He finds inspiration in a famous silver screen archaeologist.
There's a scene in the first 10 minutes of Raiders of the Lost Ark where Indiana Jones is running towards the ledge. He jumps and he misses it, but he grabs on. He grabs a root, and he pulls himself up and rolls under the gate just as it's closing. That kind of suspense, I wanted to get that into a game.
Mechner wants to combine the feel of a movie he loves with an Arabian setting similar to 1001 Nights. The result is a 2D action-adventure game called Prince of Persia.
In many ways, Prince of Persia is kind of like a sequel to Karateka.
Prince of Persia took the same fluid animation and very simple, emotional, melodramatic story and combined it with kind of a modular, traps-based environment.
his whole view of the thing was to really incorporate the story into the gameplay rather than, stopping the game and then showing some story and then continuing with the story. He really wanted to roll that all into one thing.
The challenges of making a game like Prince of Persia are daunting, but Mechner is determined to bring his vision to life.
That's it. Flip to the right. Oh! Oops.
By 1986, Jordan Mechner is living in California and working hard on his newest game, Prince of Persia. Like many developers of his time, he must wrestle with limited technology.
One of the biggest limitations in the earlier stuff is definitely sound. You hear about composers making music for systems in that era, and it was really like composing with one hand tied behind your back.
Well, the big problem on the Apple II with music was that the computer was only capable of playing one note at a time. My dad was trained as a classical pianist when he was young, so I asked my dad if he would compose the music. First for Karateka, and then for Prince of Persia.
Mechner uses a new technique in animation with the help of his 15-year-old brother, David.
Jordan Mechner apparently took a lot of video footage of his brother jumping up and down and running around, hanging on ledges. After that, he basically was called rotoscoping, and he rotoscoped his brother's movements. And he really studied that very, very hard and tried to really emulate almost perfectly his brother's movements.
I wanted to create a character that would have weight. When you were running, you had momentum, and if you then pushed the joystick in the other direction to turn around, the character's arm would kind of flail behind him, because it's hard to turn around when you're running that fast in one direction.
The whole breakthrough in terms of technology, which is the rotoscope, helped everyone to gather around this magnificent character who was the very first one to be so well animated.
As Prince of Persia gets closer to completion, Mechner's talents become more and more apparent.
Jordan was a master in game design, level design ingredients, building the right learning curve, the right difficulty curve.
The time limit on Prince of Persia is what kind of heightened the whole experience of the game. You're sweating, you're wondering if you're gonna make it or not. You have no weapon, and you gotta find the weapon. Clock's still ticking. The whole time, the game has this incredible tension.
The most appealing thing was how simple all the elements that Jordan managed to bring together to create such deep emotions.
The AI of the enemies was also pretty advanced for a game like that. I mean, you were out in a full-out sword battle with these guys. It wasn't just like hack slash and then they're out of your way. You engaged in kind of a lengthy sword battle with these guys and hoped to put them away just in time for you to keep going.
Broderbund releases Prince of Persia for the Apple II in 1989.
It's funny, the big worry with Prince of Persia 1 was because I programmed it on the Apple II, and when it came out in '89, the Macintosh had already been introduced. It didn't seem like very many consumers were ever going to see it, simply because Apple II games weren't really being bought in stores anymore. What really saved Prince of Persia was the console versions that came out in the following years.
The first Prince of Persia game is a huge success, not only because it created a palette for the rest of the video game industry to work off of, but also it was ported to so many different systems, and there were people playing that all over the place.
Prince of Persia will go on to sell 2 million copies. Meanwhile, Mechner decides to take a break.
And at that point, I'd spent a good part of my youth writing computer games, and I was kind of eager to get out and experience the world and have adventures and so forth outside of the industrial park in Northern California, where it seemed like I'd been forever. So I went back to New York, went to film school, then I lived in Paris to make a film.
But he doesn't step out of games completely.
When Broderbund came to me, wanted me to do Prince of Persia 2, my first reaction was, no, I don't want to program another game. It's too hard. It takes too long. We were able to work out an arrangement whereby I didn't have to program it, I would just come up with a story. I would do storyboards, and then they had their own team of engineers and artists who would do what I saw as the hard work, which I had to do on Prince of Persia 1. So this was great because I was actually living in Paris, and I was able to send back and forth, everything they needed to keep working on the game.
Mechner spends the next 4 years shooting a short film and working on a sequel to Prince of Persia. Prince of Persia, The Shadow and the Flame comes out for the PC in 1993 and outsells the original. In 1997, Mechner branches out and releases an adventure game called The Last Express. The game is praised by critics, but sales are sluggish.
So it was kind of this bizarre labor of love, this project that took us 4 years to do. And ultimately, there was not a huge market for adventure games in '97, especially adventure games that took place in 1914 on the Orient Express. The game's beautiful. I love the project. I think all of us who worked on it are very proud of it, but it didn't have the kind of success that the Prince of Persia games did.
With the disappointing performance of The Last Express, Mechner feels like he's done with games. On September 17, 1999, Red Orb Entertainment releases Prince of Persia 3D for the PC. A Dreamcast port is also made, called Prince of Persia Arabian Nights. Mechner's involvement with the games is minimal.
I went on from Last Express to write movie screenplays. I did a little consulting for them on the project at the beginning, but ultimately that was a Vertiburn project that later became a Mattel project.
Well, Prince of Persia 3D kind of came out under the radar. Nobody really paid that much attention to it.
Mechner decides to take another break from the game industry to make a documentary.
I took a few years off from making video games and focused on my other love, which is film. The project was a documentary about a neighborhood of Los Angeles that was destroyed in the 50s to build Dodger Stadium. It's called Chavez Ravine, a Los Angeles story.
Meanwhile, a French company called Ubisoft picks up the rights to the Prince of Persia franchise and calls on their studio in Montreal, Canada, to work on reviving the series.
In secret, we were already working on very early prototype and first mock-up for the game. Jordan and I met for the first time at E3 2001, and we immediately discussed the idea of making a rebirth for this license. In July 2001, 2 months after I've met with Jordan, I invited him here to show him what the team have made at that time. And when he saw those mock-ups, those little AVIs we've made, he was totally flabbergasted. And I will remember all my life Jordan's words saying, "This is reawakening the joy of making video game to me."
I think we all saw this as a terrifically exciting opportunity to take something that was so old that we loved and make it new again.
We had, the godfather of the license and the action-adventure genre telling us, go ahead. And then we started.
After 8 months in development, Jordan came in as the official scriptwriter, and he rewrote a new story, totally new, and worked with us till the end.
Ubisoft Montreal looks to other games for influences on how to make Sands of Time truly unique.
Eco was one of our main influence, and then we had an example of the type of game we were trying to make already. And also Tony Hawk, Pro Skater, that was another where you can really, you just play and try stuff and be good at it and have really a spectacular character.
One feature that truly sets the Sands of Time apart from other games is the player's control over the flow of time.
Wouldn't it be cool if instead of dying, you could turn back time, rewind, and then replay from that point? That way you could play continuously, and only rarely would you die and interrupt the fun of playing.
We wanted wanted to have our own technological breakthrough.
I could turn back time.
Which is all the control time features, the real-time rewind.
The Prince himself gets an update.
We always knew that he was going to be a really agile, acrobatic guy. He's not like muscle-bound. He's more the kind of clever trickster. Developing a character who looked the way that the character felt to play, that was the challenge. He had to have an attitude that would make gamers today really want to be the Prince and play in that world. I'm very happy with the design we came up with.
As does the gameplay.
A lot of 3D games are they're beautiful, but they're kind of clunky to actually play. So we wanted to have the mechanics and the camera so taken care of that it could become second nature to the player. You could just hit buttons and do a sequence of moves and have this incredible acrobatic thrill of movement.
What they really succeeded with The Sands of Time is creating a very seamless animation that really makes you feel like you're controlling the character. These animations aren't just pre-scripted things, but you're causing this animation to happen.
Ubisoft releases Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time for the PC, Xbox, PlayStation 2, and GameCube on November 6, 2003.
Sands of Time, unfortunately, is one of those games that was a critical success. It had great reviews. They said it was an excellent game, but it didn't really translate into the blockbuster sales that was expected. To the point that even a couple months later, Ubisoft bundled Splinter Cell with Prince of Persia. You buy Prince of Persia, and then you get a free Splinter Cell.
After a relatively slow start, Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time sells more than 2 million copies worldwide.
The way that, the gamer have appreciated the game has been really, really good for us. We were very surprised, yep.
The Prince has returned, and his new adventures are just beginning. After its 2003 release, Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time is showered with praise and sweeps the 2003 AIAS Awards.
And the award goes to Prince of Persia.
Prince of Persia.
Prince of Persia. Prince of Persia.
Prince of Persia, Sands of Time.
We received 8 prizes. It was a little bit embarrassing after the 5th, when we had to come back all the time on the stage and say,
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
thank you again for that award.
That was beautiful. Thank you very much.
Winning awards in a place like DICE really goes to show that your peers respect you, that people in the industry that you work with really respect what you've done with the game, which I think is a huge honor to have.
Work on a sequel titled Prince of Persia: Warrior Within begins immediately.
When we started the project, we looked over Sands of Time. We didn't want it to change everything because the recipe was good in the Sands of Time and improve what can be improved.
The team sets out to make a darker, grittier game.
The Prince himself has changed. He's evolved. He's the same character, but he's grown up.
He has grown up. He's much more mature.
And everything around him also have matured.
There's a good landscapes that you're gonna see in the game. There's no texture. I have to put all the textures, do the modeling, refining, because it's all edgy like this.
There is a link in the story between the Sands of Time and Warrior Within.
In the first game, he made a little mistake, opening the hourglass. By doing that, he screwed up the timeline. He called upon himself his own incarnation of fate, which is what we call it the Haka, which is based on the true Persian mythology.
So this is the Haka, one of our big bosses, and the idea was to give him more of a badass walk. I'll go in and add some up and down to give him more bounce because he's such a big guy.
The Haka is the guardian of time. It's a huge beast that cannot be killed.
Prince is about this size next to him.
The Haka's job is to kill the prince. So the sad news is that the prince is gonna die.
He cannot change his fate. He has to die. So, of course, as a hero, you will try to find a way to change that.
The prince's full idea is to rewind time before even the creation of the Sands of Time. Because no Sands of Time, no Dahaka. And no Dahaka, happy, happy joy.
In the game, we're going to travel through time. This one is like in the present.
But now he can also travel in the past for centuries.
Which enabled us to go a little bit earlier in time, so we could visit some different kind of environments. We were going to ancient Persia rather than the Arabic style of the previous game. So this time it's more a mix between Persian and Greek.
The highlight of the sequel is an enhanced fighting system.
So the freeform fighting system as a gameplay mechanics is basically a mix between the Prince of Persia fighting system and the SSX combo stuff, where you can basically define your own fighting skill.
The freeform fighting is just how to make the experience in the combat unique.
In the fall of 2004, Ubisoft releases Prince of Persia: Warrior Within for the PC and all the major consoles. Meanwhile, Jordan Mechner combines his two greatest passions, games and film.
Jerry Bruckheimer and Disney have picked up the rights to make Prince of Persia as a feature film. I'm writing it. Jerry Bruckheimer is producing for Disney. This is a terrifically exciting chance to kind of bring the Prince of Persia full circle to his cinematic roots.
As Jordan and the Prince tackle the challenges of the big screen, it's important to recognize how far they have taken the world of gaming.
Not only that, but Prince of Persia is also kind of considered one of the first action-adventure games that really spawned a whole bunch of different action-adventure games like Tomb Raider.
Prince of Persia was a very important franchise 10 years ago with Jordan Mechner, and we have made a great work with the team. Now that Prince of Persia license is something that we want to push forward for the future.
I don't think I could have foreseen that 15 years later, Prince of Persia would still be alive, still be played and remembered. You know, that's probably one of the most rewarding aspects.